And that right there is the truest statement that's said all day, right? You know it. I know it. Our big fat mouths get us in trouble. And listen, we are so glad that you're here today because, word on the street is you have a big fat mouth. And I see you all elbowing the person next to you. So I know it's true. It's being confirmed. But I, as well, I've been looking forward to this series because I know that there are things that I need to learn and apply in my own world. My name is Peter, and I'm the pastor here at Hope City Church. We're so glad that you've chosen to be with us today. If you're coming back after being here with us at Easter, then we're thrilled. We would love to show you around. We'd love to answer any questions that you might have. And I want to introduce you to some great friends afterwards. And so make sure you stick around and grab a donut afterwards. But, somebody asked me, they're like, so how long are we going to be in this series? And I said, well, maybe 4 or 5 years. Like if we have to, we're just going to stick with it because we're going to do whatever it takes for us to learn how to control this very, very little thing that has so much control over our lives. We want to get this right. Because here's why this is so important. It's so important for us because our words have the power to give life, and they also have the power to take life or to take life away from people. They've got the power to lift you up, or words can also just put you down. And over the next, 4 weeks, we're going to talk about several problems with our mouth, but one of those problems we're going to talk about is the problem of lying. We're going to talk about, what happens when our words get in front of us and we end up saying things that aren't actually true. We're going to talk about the problem of criticizing and being critical. We're going to talk about the problem of gossip and how we use our words, to talk about other people. And today, we're going to talk about an incredible topic, which I hope you will be able to take and apply to your life even right now. But this entire message series has been based around one thing that Jesus said, a very small thing, not very many words, but something that Jesus said that has incredible power and incredible meaning for your life and for mine. And it's crazy because he almost said it in passing. He was with a bunch of religious leaders. They were called the Pharisees. And so these guys were kind of the ones that knew it all. And Jesus says these few words. He says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And what Jesus is saying is that what's inside of you gives definition to what comes out of you. This morning and throughout this entire series, we're going to be investigating what's going on inside of us, but that's showing up in external ways and things that we see. Now, to make this real for you, I want you to hear something that happened in my own world, in my own life recently, and I think many of you will be able to identify with this, especially if you're a parent. But my wife Tiffany and I, this is my family, my wife Tiffany and my son Noah, Grace, and my youngest daughter Leah. It was not too many weekends ago that we had spent all Friday driving kids around. I applied for my Uber license, and I received it. I've just been driving kids all over the place all Friday night. And then on Saturday, I had this total dad guilt thing. I don't know if anybody else feels this, but we're man, I'm away a lot during the week. And so then on Saturday, I feel like I got to really just pour in and spend tons of time with my kids. And so we did all these fun activities as a family. We went around and went to the park and skateboarded and this and that and the other thing. And we just kind of poured in there. And then it's Saturday night now. And Tiffany and I are standing in the kitchen, and she's over at the stove, and I'm elbow deep in raw chicken, and we had told our kids, hey, listen, start doing homework, get ready, because the weekend it's coming to a close, and Monday's coming quick, and you got to be ready for school. And so one child, who will remain nameless, is sitting in the kitchen table, and I hear out of the corner of over here, I hear, hey, can you help me real quick? And I'm like, no, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm making dinner right now, and mom's over here. She's making dinner. And then I hear this faint but very audible, fine. You never helped me anyway. I was like, what? I'm like, you're lucky there is a counter between me and you. We never help you anything. We never do anything for you anyway. I'm like, are you kidding me? And then all of a sudden, as soon as it came out, I was like, I'm sorry, do you want to try that again? I was like, I'm going to give you grace this time. How about we try that all over again, right? And I could see it was like, where's the closest exit? Like, I got to get out of here, right? Like, I'm out of here. And it was this moment of like, whoo, I'm hot. I'm visibly like getting upset and frustrated. I'm like, so what I did for you yesterday was nothing, right? Like driving you all over town didn't matter. Spending all morning like doing stuff together as a family, that didn't count either, right? And I'm making your dinner right now. And this doesn't count either? Like, you never do anything for me? What? Are you kidding me, right? Like, and one word after another was focused on complaining. I think that, this is such a real picture of life. And somebody else told me, they're like, it's this, after the first service, they were like, it's so true. So much of my time is dealt with filtering out complaining in my kids, right? And so here's what I want you to do today. I want you to personalize this message. I want you to personalize this through the lens of your own complaining. And so maybe if you are so bold or so brave, take your pen out, click your pen, grab the notes from inside of your program, and I'd love for you, just on the top, there's no space for you, just wherever you find space, I'd love for you to write down, what is that one thing that you're most likely or most often complaining about? All right? Just what is that one thing that you're most often complaining about? To be fair, like I'm going to play along too, except I'm not going to write it. I'll share with you mine. Because all week I've been thinking about this. Like, what is it that I complain about a lot? And I find for me, it's like I complain about the fact that like I'm on the go so constantly, right? Like that work never ends. I'm out a lot of nights, and like I don't have a 9-to-5 job, and blah blah blah, wah wah wah, woe is me, right? Like all this stuff. But like, what do I complain about is kind of the on the go nature of my schedule. So maybe I don't know what you're writing down right now, but whatever it may be, identify that thing. See, maybe you complain about not being married. You're like, oh, I'm not married, and everybody else is married, or everybody else is having a baby right now, and whoa, right? Like, that was never, that may be you. You can say, oh, I just wish I was married. Then what happens is you get married. Who do you complain about now? My husband is not wah, wah, right? Like, listen, ladies, like, my husband, you should hear what he does, right? Like, he takes his contacts out, flicks them on the floor, and like, wah, 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 right? Like, what is the deal with this guy? Men are so gross. I don't know who that guy is, but he's nasty, right? Maybe you complain about how tight the money is. And every month you're like, we just have no money around here, like nothing, right? Every month. Or my house is too small. Or my boss is annoying and he doesn't listen to me. He doesn't support me. Or you complain about the Wi-Fi signal. Or it's too hot. It's too humid. And like, you hear what we do with our big fat mouth? Like, all we do is we just start complaining about things. And if you listen to the things that I just shared, examples that I just shared, how many of those things do you actually have control over? Like, barely any. We complain about the Wi-Fi. You have no control over the Wi-Fi, right? Much less the weather. And these are the things that we complain about. In fact, it's not really the problem that there isn't anything on Netflix to watch, right? Like, that's not the problem. It's not that your house is too small. That's not the problem. And throughout this entire series, what I want to help us realize is that the problem isn't externally. It's not what's around us. The problem is what's going on inside of us. As Jesus says, that from the overflow of our heart, the mouth speaks. What's inside of us gives definition to what comes out of us. And what I want you to hear is that the problem is not that we have so little. It's that we've made God so little in our lives, and we've allowed ourselves to become so big and all-consuming. We've made life all about us. And what it has, it's messed us up. It's messed up our heart. And we have a heart issue that we need to look at. When I think about people complaining in the Bible, one of the world-class Olympian complainers was the entire nation of Israel. And especially after God removed them from slavery out of Egypt, it's kind of like what happened with my kids, right? Like, I do all this great stuff for you, and then you complain, right? Like, how does this work in your mind? But this happened as well with the nation of Israel. They were in captivity. They were slaves in Egypt, and And after a period of time, God heard their prayers, God heard their cries, and he came to them, and he actually miraculously removed them from slavery. You know, remember that there were the 10 miraculous plagues that changed Pharaoh's heart, where finally Pharaoh was like, get these guys out of here. I got to get God off my back. Like, get them out of here, send them off to wherever, and like, just let them go. And then the nation of Israel kind of backs into a corner against the Red Sea. And then Pharaoh's like, wait a second, who's going to make the bricks? Who's going to build the pyramids? Who's going to do all this stuff? And he's like, go get those people back, right? Like, send off all the chariots, the horsemen, and round them up, put them back in slavery. I changed my mind. And what does God do? God opens the Red Sea miraculously. The entire nation of Israel walks through, some 6 million people walk through this Red Sea, and then God closes the sea behind them, separating them from the slavery and the captivity that they once were in. And what do these people do? The moment that they're out of slavery, all they do is complain, whine, and just go on and on and on about it. Exodus chapter 14, verse 11. Look at the things that they actually said to Moses. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you had to bring us out to the desert to die? Like, couldn't we just die there? Like, this is what they're actually saying. Like, what have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Time out. I'm sorry. Like, remember, you were in slavery. Like, you couldn't make up your own mind. You couldn't just have free will to go do whatever you want. You were a slave. Didn't we say to you in Egypt, just leave us alone? Right? Slam the door. Leave us alone. Let us serve the Egyptians. It would be better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Guys, I'm telling you, it gets quiet in the room right about now, because all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's me. We say things like, I'd rather be dead than stuck in this marriage. I'd rather be dead right now than deal with this job, right? I'd rather be dead than live with being a single person. And really, we're just like the Israelites. We're just doing exactly what they're doing. See, when God provided for them, when God gave them food every day, they turned around and said, yeah, well, it's not leeks and onions. We had them in Egypt. Okay. And then, like, what else does God do? They're walking through the desert for 40 years, and God miraculously makes it so that their clothes never wear out. God provides water from them out of a rock. He takes care of all of their needs, all of their necessities, and he is so generous to them, and yet they have the audacity to be like, yeah, we should be slaves. Because at least we had fish when we lived in Egypt. You are out of your minds. And then Moses says something that should stop us in our tracks. He says this, you're not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. He's pointing out that, hey, listen, you're not grumbling against me as a leader. Like, yeah, my name's Moses. I'm leading this whole charge here, but you're not actually grumbling against me. You're complaining against the Lord. They're complaining against God, because imagine if every time that you and I complain, that it's not just about our circumstances or about the traffic or about another person even, but what if in God's eyes we're actually complaining about him? Perhaps that's the way that he sees it. It's almost as if we're saying to him, you don't ever do anything for me, right? You know how well that goes over in my house. Like, I can't imagine what the creator of the universe has to say about that. Like, I don't do anything for you? Let's talk, right? Like, see, if we're going to fix our big fat mouth, if we're going to curb our complaining, then one of the first things that you and I need to do is we need to focus on God. We actually need to stop making everything about us, and we need to focus on God. Instead of look at what I'm not getting, or look at what everyone else has that I don't have. If Moses were here, I think this morning he would want to remind us by saying we need to change our focus. We need to look at something other than ourselves. Like, what if you stopped focusing on everything that you don't have, on everything that God has given you instead of the things that you don't have? You guys remember when Circuit City existed? Yeah. Okay. So some of you do, and I had this habit as a kid, as a teenager, really. And I would lay on the carpet on a Sunday afternoon after church, and I would get the newspaper. That's back when you got newspapers. And there was a circular for Circuit City every week that came in that newspaper. I didn't care about the news. I just cared about the comics and this Circuit City ad, because I was kind of like a tech geek. I liked things like that. And I remember looking at it every single week and just kind of perusing, looking it over and being like, oh man, that would be awesome to have that. Like, that Discman says it's got like skip protection, right? Like, I can be walking with my CD and it's not going to skip on me. I need that. How come I don't have that one, right? And then it was like all these other things started kind of getting into my mind. And what I realized was that I was putting myself into an unhealthy pattern of all I was doing was looking at the things I didn't have. That's it. All I was doing was comparing what I did have, all these awesome things that I already had, against the things that I don't have. And too many of us find ourselves trapped in that spot where it's like we peruse Amazon and we're like, wait a second. That Instapot is way bigger than the Instapot that I have. Who knew that they could make an Instapot that would cook a whole turkey in like 35 seconds? Like, who knew this stuff? Who knew that there's vacuums that vacuum on their own? I have to push mine around. Like, we need to do that. Like, I don't have that. Why don't I have? And it's like, whoa, we get ourselves way out of whack because we need to actually switch our focus from ourselves and focus on God. This very week, I had a conversation with somebody about finances. And they were asking me about tithing and specifically tithing to Hope City Church. And they said, hey, listen, like, does it matter if I only give $100? Like, if that's all I have to give, does that matter? And I said, well, let me break it down for you, actually, because this is a fascinating conversation. And so I shared with them, I said, let me explain it this way. If you were to hold on to $100, what would you do with it? And they said to me, I'd spend it. Okay. So what would you spend it on? Well, probably myself. I go, okay. So let's talk about it this way. Tithing is giving back to God a portion of what he's already given you and using it for something other than yourself, right? So it's taking your eyes off of self and putting it onto others. Tithing is giving it back to God. And I said, what if $100, and I went on to explain how $100 almost pays the rent for one room here at Hope City. So like I said, let's just call it even. Let's say it's $100 to pay the rent for the media center over here where our kids meet. Where right now there's kids meeting in there. I said, what if I told you that, for $100, we could underwrite that room over there? So rather than spending it on yourself, imagine what God could do through $100 that you gave back to God and what he could do in the life of, 40-something kids that are in there right now. Like 40-something kids that are, learning about who God is, and they have adults in their lives that are caring for them, pouring into them, that recognize who they are, they see them, that they are told that God created them the way that they are, on purpose, for a purpose. See, one of the fastest ways that you and I can curb our attitude for complaining is by getting the perspective off of ourselves and putting it onto God. And yet Satan, our enemy, has made it so easy for us to stop focusing on God and to actually focus on ourselves more and more. Truthfully, it would be really easy for me as a communicator right now just to make you all feel incredibly guilty, right? Like I could show you pictures of our trip to Guatemala where we drilled a clean water well, and then I could show a picture of a Starbucks latte and be like, this is what you could provide if you stop drinking lattes. That's not what I'm trying to do. And in fact, you can breathe easy. Everybody just breathe in with me right now. Ready? Go. Okay, let it out now. Okay, here's what we're going to do. For the remainder of this series, my promise to you is this. This is not a guilt-driven series. I'm not going to guilt you into change. I'm not going to guilt you into anything. In fact, for the remainder of this day, my goal is not to make you feel guilty, but for you to see that there is a better and another way to think about yourself and to think about other people. And so today, I actually want to spend the rest of our time talking about an example of somebody who had every right to complain and yet didn't. I want us to see that this person who you and I would know as the Apostle Paul, who wrote a majority of the New Testament. He was an incredible man who did some incredible things, and yet he lived through some terrible times in his life as well. The number one desire of Paul's heart was to go to Rome and to be a preacher in Rome, because he wanted to get to Rome because Rome was the epicenter of the world at that time. And if you could get to the epicenter of the world, then you could potentially change some leaders, change the hearts of some leaders, and then the gospel of Christianity could go out to all parts of the world, and it could impact the world. But Paul, he made it to Rome, but not as a preacher, but Paul got there as a prisoner. Paul was a prisoner, but not just any kind of prisoner. He was a prisoner that was chained up to a Roman guard 24 hours a day for 2 entire years. And every single day, he was awaiting his potential execution. Like, this is the place that Paul found himself. What would you say if you're Paul? Right? You're the Apostle Paul. You're the guy that has written, a majority of the New Testament scriptures that you and I call the Bible. You're the guy that has started churches all over the Mediterranean rim. You're the guy that, you're like making things happen for the Lord. And then you end up in prison in Rome, in the very place that you wanted to be in order to preach the gospel. If I'm Paul, I know what I would say. I mean, some of you are a little more holy than me, but that's okay. I'd be like, come on, God. Are you kidding me? Like, this is what you're going to do to me? This isn't fair. I've been serving you. Like, I've given my blood, my sweat, and my tears for you. I've been stoned. I've been beaten. I've been bitten by snakes. I've been cold. I've been hungry. I've been all of these things. I've been laughed at. I've been mocked. And I'm stuck here in a filthy prison next to this nasty guard who smells like BO. Can you heal that guard's BO in Jesus' name? Come on, somebody. Like, got to do something about this, God. This stinks. The floor is hard. There's no pillow. Like, the food stinks. That's what I would be like. But do you know what Paul says? Paul says this: do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe. Paul is saying, listen, don't complain. Do everything without complaining. Because you know who complains? This crooked and depraved generation. Everybody's complaining. That's normal. And when you don't complain, you're going to stand out. Don't complain. Stop complaining. This is a very high standard. He's saying whatever you do, wherever you are, whatever your action or words you use, do everything without grumbling and complaining. And there's a lot of spiritual reasons why you and I shouldn't complain. There's a lot of that. But there's also some very physical reasons why we shouldn't complain too. I heard a guy by the name of Dr. Travis Bradberry. He wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And he was at a conference that I was at, and he gave some of his research as to why you and I shouldn't complain. He's done some research on the whole act of complaining and what happens in your brain when you complain. He says that as you're complaining, you're hardwiring your brain to continue complaining. That the more that you see that's negative, your brain is more likely to pick out more things that are negative, to find the negative when you're negative. He calls this a confirmation bias. In other words, you expect something to be bad, and therefore, you get what you expect. For example, I'm biased against something, and my bias is self-confirming. For some of you, you could say something like, you know what, I don't like church, because you go to church, and here's what happens. No one ever talks to you, right? Like, you just show up, and then you leave, and guess what? Before you've even arrived, you already have it in your mind that you're going to just show up, you're going to come sit down, and you're not going to talk to anybody, you're going to leave, and then you're going to go home and say, I told you so. I told you that nobody was going to talk to you when you go to church, right? Like, you have a confirmation bias in your head. For 11 years, I was a youth pastor, and I'm telling you, there was nothing that bothered me more than when somebody would say, oh, every teenager rebels. And I'd be like, really? Every teenager rebels? Like, that's just what they do. No, that's your confirmation bias speaking. That's your preconceived idea, so that when your kids start to test the boundaries, when they start to, you kind of push back a little bit and see, what can I get away with mom and dad? You can just throw up your hands and say, see, I told you, every teenager rebels. Every teenager, there it goes, right? See, this was the problem with the Israelites. they were so negative when they were in captivity. It was just, oh, this is the worst, which it was bad. And they were negative there, and then when they were free, they continued to be negative. Their negative mindset trained them to be even more negative. Rather than seeing what God had done for them, all they could see was what they didn't have. And I'm telling you that I don't want to be like that. Like, I don't want to be preconceived to find the bad things in this world. Like, I don't want to wake up and be like, oh, everything is terrible, right? Like, there's already enough bad in this world that I want to train my mind to find the things that are good. That's the things that are pleasant, the things that are helpful and hopeful, right? Like, instead of always focusing on what's negative, when you look at the Apostle Paul, the way that he lived, the way that he talked, the things that he communicated, these next two ideas would have come right out of his mouth. And if you're taking notes with us this morning, the second point here is that Paul would say this: if you can change, change. Like, if you can change, do that. Change. It's not a sin to notice that something's wrong. It's not a sin to be like, you know what, there's something wrong over here. We need to make a change there. No, see, listen to this. Righteous dissatisfaction is totally fine. If there's something that you're like, that's not right, God wouldn't want it that way, or there's something you look at it and you're like, on behalf of God, don't complain about it. Do something about it. Don't just put comments on social media and be like, oh, this is the worst, and then get on with your life, right? No. Stop and do something about it. Let me ask you a very real question, though. What have you done about the things that you complain about? So that thing that you wrote down on the top of your notes earlier, what have you done about it? What are you doing to stop that thing from repeating itself? Maybe you wrote down your marriage. You would say, like, my marriage is lifeless, my marriage it's sexless, and it's unenjoyable, right? Well, have you tried to breathe life into that? Like, have you planned some sort of, romantic dates? Men, let me give you a hint. Have you brushed your teeth in a while? Like, have you done that very thing that, like, attracted you to the other person? Like, like you used to get all, you used to work out and you used to, like, be ready so that when you went on that date with your bride or that person that you love, you're like, man, I want her to be like, yeah, that's my man, right? And now it's like, well, whatever. Yeah, that's the guy that follows me around. I don't know. Or maybe it's your kids, right? Maybe you'd say, my kids they're the worst, right? Like, all this kind of stuff. They're so disrespectful. Well, have you leaned in a little bit? Like, have you said, okay, listen, this isn't acceptable in our house. Time out. Like, that's disrespectful, and we're not going to do that here. Okay? And then have you shown them opportunities for growth, or have you just thrown your hands up and said, well, my confirmation bias says that all kids rebel. Oh, well. Maybe it's your job. I talk to people all the time. They're like, I hate my job. If you can change. Have you looked for another job? Like, have you even started, right? Like, here's what humanity would say. It's easier to complain than work for change. It just is. It's easier to say something than to do something. But Paul would tell us that if you can change. If I could get out of prison, Paul would say, I'm out of prison, because that's not why I came to Rome. That's not why I wanted to come to Rome. But if you can't change, adapt. Because Paul couldn't change his situation. He couldn't change what was happening in his world, but he could adapt. If you can do something about it, do it, of course. But if you can't, then change how you think about it. Change your perspective on something. Change what you see in the circumstances that you find yourself. See, Paul is so clear in Philippians 2, verse 17 through 18. If you remember, he's chained to a Roman soldier, and he's awaiting his very possible execution. And his dream was to preach the gospel, and he's locked up in prison. And look what he says. He says, but even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I'm glad, and I'm going to rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. Paul says, even if I'm stuck in prison, even if the Apostle Paul, I'm the Apostle Paul, even if this is where my life ends, I'm not going to complain. I'm glad and I'm going to rejoice with all of you. Even if I'm going to fix my eyes on Jesus, I'm not going to complain. Even if I have it hard, yeah, but I'm going to rejoice in it. See, Paul further clarifies this, and he says, but even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering, like, what's the deal with a drink offering? No, this isn't like when you offer to buy the first round at the bar. No, that's generous, but that's not a drink offering. So what happened in this day and age is that they would go to the temple, and it was a customary to bring some sort of animal. The animal would be sacrificed on an altar, and it would be given over to the Lord as an act of worship. And so when the animal was laying there on the altar, they would bring something called a drink offering. They would take their most precious liquid, which was probably like a really, really fine bottle of wine. Unless, of course, they were Southern Baptist, and then it was just a really, really good bottle of grape juice. But they would, it's okay. But they would take that really, really fine bottle of wine, or potentially honey, very expensive, and all they would do is they would pour it out on the altar. In a second, it would just be gone. What happens when you take a really hot pan, like a frying pan, and you just stick it under cold water? And steam just kind of comes off of it. The same thing is true of what's happening here. You pour out that wine, and it hits the flames, and it's just gone. Or they would take that honey, and they would pour the honey, and in an instant, it would be gone. Paul is saying, listen, even if my life is as short and as steam rising into the air, even if I'm like a drink offering that is so valuable and just gone, I'm going to rejoice in that. Even if I'm never famous, I'm going to be faithful. Even if I never get promoted, I'm going to continue to give my best. Even if it never gets better than this, I'm not going to complain. Even if, and there's so many things that you and I, we can look at. If you can't change, adapt. How could Paul be in prison? He could see all these horrible things around him and offer praise and worship to God. Because Paul knew something. He switched his perspective. He's like, wait, you think that I'm the prisoner? Hold on, listen. I got a guy chained to me. For every 8 hours, I get a new guy. You know what I get to do? I get to preach to that guy, and he can't go anywhere. Like, you guys, you can get up and go whenever you want. This guy was chained to Paul. Like, he had to listen to him. He listened to him write the entire book of Philippians, right? Like, do not do this. Do not be anxious. Do not fear. And the guy's like, what? What gives here? Look at what he says in verse 12. He says, now I want you to know, brothers, that what's happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. P.S. There's a guard on his arm right now. And the guy's like, what? What's happened to me has really served to advance the gospel? No, because Paul knows. He's like, okay, I know what I'm doing. He's not complaining. He's changed his perspective. Look at verse 13. As a result, it's become clear throughout the whole palace guard to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. Every guard is like, yeah, I know why you're here, Paul. I know. I get it. He's saying, you think I'm it? I'm the prisoner? No way. That thing that was holding him captive, he's flipped it. He said, no way. I'm going to change my perspective, and I'm going to give thanks to the Lord. See, listen, this morning, I don't know what your even if moment is. I don't know, like, Paul's in prison. He's got this thing that is holding him back, that's keeping him, preventing him from doing what he thought he was going to do. I don't know what your even if moment is. I don't know what that even if situation is. But I wonder this morning, if you need a reminder that, man, God, if you woke up this morning, it's a good day. Like, God put breath in your lungs this morning. We say it around here all the time, that if you have a pulse, you have a purpose. And so far, you're doing pretty good. Okay? God isn't finished yet. God may be working through your situation in ways that you don't even know about. Yeah, I get it. Your situation may be painful. It may be a lot of heartache. It may be hard. But even if, would you be willing to replace complaining with gratitude? God may be suggesting a change in your perspective. I don't know what your hardest situation is, but many a preacher have said this. When you're down to nothing, God is up to something. And I've found that to be true in my life as well. That when I'm like, there's nothing left, very often it's when I see God show up in incredible ways. Because when there's nothing left, perspective is off of me, and it's back onto him. The psalmist David, he wrote these things. He wrote some incredible things, but in Psalm 103, he said, "Oh, my soul, bless God. From my head to my toe, I'm going to bless his holy name." My soul, just bless God, and don't forget a single blessing. Some of you need to switch your focus today. You need to switch your focus from yourself onto the things that God has done for you. All of the good things that God has given you. Or maybe any time that you're tempted to complain, to sit back and just talk about the great things that God has done for you. About a month ago, I started a practice of, before I did anything else in my office, the very first thing I do is when I sit down, is I recognize that there was things about me that were getting kind of out of control. Like I was quick to complain. I was quick to point out things that were unhealthy or things that weren't great, especially on a Monday, right? Like, what happened yesterday? Why didn't that work, right? And I'm the boss, so I get to do that kind of thing. But I recognized it was really unhealthy, and so I started to keep a practice of the first thing I did in the morning was to write down 5 things that I'm grateful for. And the first day was April 2nd, so in the beginning of this month, and it was a little harder. I remember being like, 5 things? Why did I pick 5 things? Why couldn't I just pick 2, right? And I started to complain about the practice of choosing gratitude, right? What a moron. But I'm looking at it, and what I wrote, and number 1, I wrote, my wife. Can't think of anything, just write your spouse, right? Then I said, no. Tiffany has a way about her that's encouraging but not enabling. I couldn't do this without her. 2, I wrote pastoral friends. I'm grateful for James, Rich, Tom, Jason, Josh. These guys get it, and they know me, and I get to share with them. The third thing I wrote is I'm grateful for an engaged staff. Last night's staff meeting was great to see people taking ownership and making it better. 4th, Arla and I enjoy this space, and it brings joy for me to be there. 5th, the office. I'm digging deep here. I'm not working in my garage or my bedroom anymore. You know what happened next? It kept going. Days later, I could just rattle stuff off because I was in the practice of recognizing the things that God has given me. I'm grateful for so many things. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our church family. I'm grateful for people who recognize that we need to live outside of ourselves and beyond ourselves. There's so much to be grateful for, and yet we're so often just blindsided by it. And so this morning, I want to give you an opportunity to get really practical. Some of you need to start doing that practice. You need to wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm going to, at the beginning of the day, before I do anything else, maybe after I have my coffee, but not too far after that, I'm going to write down 5 things that I'm grateful for. Because we want to replace complaining with gratitude. But today, we want to help you do that in a practical way. We have communion on my left and my right, and there is no better thing that you and I could do to help us reset that than to recognize how great God is, how good God is, and how much He loves us, than by remembering Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection through communion. As we take one of these rice crackers in just a few seconds, pick it up off the tray, dip it into the juice, and then eat that cracker. When that grape juice hits your tongue and your taste buds are kind of feeling the acidity and tasting the acidity, let that just be a reminder of God's great goodness and love for you, of all of the wonderful things that He's done for you. Let it trigger all of these other things in your life that God has provided for you. In these next few moments, would you just spend a little bit of time thinking about something other than you? And while we're doing this, remember how much God loves you by sending His Son Jesus to die for you, to forgive you from your sins so that you could be made right and have a relationship with God.